When my millionaire husband called me sterile in front of the entire courtroom, I thought my life was over, but what the judge revealed next silenced him completely. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. The courtroom was colder than I expected. I could hear the hum of the air conditioner, the shuffle of papers, and my heartbeat echoing in my ears. Grant sat across from me, calm and confident in his gray suit. He looked like the man I once fell in love with, but the warmth in his eyes had long disappeared. He smiled at his lawyer like this was all some kind of game. We were in court because he had filed for divorce. He wanted everything: the house, the cars, and even my grandmother's jewelry that had nothing to do with him. He said I didn't deserve anything because I had failed as a wife. When his lawyer stood and said, "Your Honor, my client's wife cannot bear children. She's sterile," the words hit me like a slap. I felt the air leave my chest. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I just stared at him, the man who once kissed my forehead and said he wanted to grow old with me. Grant leaned back in his chair, crossing his legs, acting like the victim. He said I had hidden my infertility, that I tricked him into marriage. The people in the courtroom looked at me with pity, as if I was broken. He loved that. I could see it in his eyes. He wanted to humiliate me. I sat quietly. I didn't try to defend myself. I didn't need to. The judge already had an envelope. It was sealed, sitting on her desk. I had submitted it privately before the hearing. Grant's lawyer kept talking, saying how I was emotionally unstable and how Grant had suffered enough. I wanted to laugh. Suffered? The man who lied, cheated, and controlled every breath I took was suddenly a victim. When it was finally my turn, I looked at the judge and said, "Your Honor, if it's okay, I'd like you to open the envelope now." The courtroom went silent. The judge nodded, took the envelope, and opened it carefully. I watched Grant's confidence flicker for the first time. He shifted in his chair, pretending not to care. Inside were two documents, a medical report and a paternity test. The medical report wasn't mine. It was his. It showed that Grant Halston was the one who was infertile. He had known it for over a year. The second document proved that the baby he'd been showing off on social gathering, the one he claimed as his child with another woman, wasn't biologically his. For a moment, nobody moved. Grant's lawyer froze mid-sentence. The judge looked at him sharply. Grant's face went pale, and that smirk he always wore vanished. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Everything I'd endured, the insults, the gaslighting, the humiliation, came crashing back to him in one single moment of truth. Grant tried to speak, but his voice cracked. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of papers rustling as the judge set the evidence down. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt since the day I married him: peace. The night I met Grant Halston is still clear in my mind. It was a hospital fundraiser, polished floors, soft jazz, glasses clinking. I was there as part of the nursing staff, helping with the silent auction. I wasn't supposed to be noticed. I wore a plain navy dress and a name tag that kept slipping off. Then he walked in. Grant Halston. Every head turned like they felt his presence before seeing him. He had that kind of confidence. Not loud, not forced, just effortless. His suit fit perfectly, his hair slightly undone in a way that felt intentional. When he smiled, it reached his eyes, and somehow the room got quieter. He moved through the crowd like he owned it, shaking hands, laughing softly, remembering names. I'd seen wealthy donors before, the ones who gave for the photo opportunity. But Grant was different, or at least he seemed that way. When our eyes met, I froze. He walked straight toward me, and for a second, I thought he must be looking for someone else. But he stopped in front of me and said, "You look like someone who hates these things as much as I do." I laughed nervously. "You mean the fundraisers or the people?" He grinned. "Both, depending on the night." That was how it began. He made me laugh when I didn't want to. He talked like someone who actually listened. When I mentioned my work in the children's ward, he didn't just nod. He asked questions, real ones, about the long shifts, the patients, the things that broke my heart. Nobody ever asked me those things before. Later that night, I found myself standing with him near the balcony overlooking the city. The lights shimmered like 1,000 tiny secrets. He leaned closer, his voice calm and sure. "You deserve someone who sees how much you give, Lena." Hearing my name in his voice made my stomach twist. He asked if he could walk me to my car. I said yes, even though I didn't need him to. In the parking lot, under the yellow light, he told me he'd like to see me again. He said it like a statement, not a question, as if it was already decided. Over the next few weeks, he sent flowers to the hospital, always one single white lily, no note. He'd call at odd hours just to ask if I'd eaten. When he showed up at the hospital with coffee after my night shifts, the other nurses teased me. But I didn't care. For the first time in years, someone made me feel noticed. He told me he admired my dedication, said he'd never met anyone so strong, so selfless. He talked about building a life together, a home by the lake, a quiet life far from noise. By the third month, I couldn't imagine a day without hearing his voice. He had this way of making everything sound certain, like he had the world figured out. When he looked at me, I forgot every reason I had to be cautious. That night at the fundraiser, I thought I'd met the man who would change my life for the better. I didn't know then, he would change it completely, but not in the way I imagined. The wedding felt like something from another world. The sky was clear, the lake still, and the air carried the soft hum of summer. White petals floated across the wooden deck where we stood, hand in hand, facing a crowd of smiling faces. My dress shimmered faintly under the afternoon sun, and when I looked at Grant, it was impossible not to believe that I was the luckiest woman alive. He'd planned every detail himself, the music, the flowers, even the exact time the doves were released. When I walked down the aisle, he didn't look nervous like I expected. He looked proud, almost like he was showing something off. Still, I told myself it was love shining in his eyes. The vows were whispered softly between us, words that felt like they could hold forever. He promised to protect me, to cherish me, to give me the world. I promised to stand beside him through everything. The guests clapped, the champagne flowed, and the photographer kept asking us to kiss one more time. Every moment was perfect, almost too perfect. After the ceremony, we danced by the lake. Lanterns floated on the water, and the night smelled like jasmine and wine. Grant held me close, murmuring, "This is just the beginning, Lena. You'll never have to worry about anything again." His voice was gentle, certain. I rested my head against his chest, believing every word. When the last guests left and the laughter faded, the silence felt strange. The house he had bought for us overlooked the lake. Tall windows, marble floors, the kind of place people only see in magazines. He carried me over the threshold, smiling for the camera that one of his friends still held. Then, when the doors closed and the flashes stopped, he set me down and took a deep breath. "You should get some rest," he said softly. "Tomorrow we'll start putting things in order." It sounded simple, but the way he said it made my chest tighten. The next morning, I found a list on the kitchen counter. Not a note, not a love letter, a list. Change your last name on all documents. Cancel night shifts. Call my assistant for wardrobe fitting. I laughed at first, thinking it was a joke. When I asked him about it, he smiled. "Every successful marriage needs structure," he said. Days turned into weeks, and those whispered promises started to sound like instructions. He wanted to approve my dresses before events. He preferred my hair long. He didn't like when I spoke too much at dinners. "You don't need to impress anyone," he'd say, touching my hand gently but firmly. The more he smiled, the smaller I became. The laughter that once filled our nights faded into silence, broken only by the ticking of the hallway clock. He never raised his voice, never shouted, but every rule, every quiet correction, chipped away at the woman who once danced freely by the lake. Sometimes I'd stand by the window, looking at the reflection of our perfect home in the dark water, wondering when love had turned into something that needed permission. It happened quietly at first, so quietly that I almost convinced myself it wasn't happening at all. The first time he raised his voice, it wasn't even about me. Or at least, that's what I told myself. We were having dinner, roasted salmon, white wine, candles flickering between us. I'd forgotten to chill the wine the way he liked it. When he took the first sip, his face stiffened. He didn't shout, but the tone of his voice cut through the air like glass. "Lena, I've told you before," he said, setting his glass down with a soft thud. "Details matter." I apologized quickly, trying to calm him. His eyes stayed cold for a long second before he forced a smile, reached across the table, and said, "It's fine, you'll remember next time." The smile didn't reach his eyes. That was the first crack I saw, small but deep enough to unsettle me. The second time came a few days later. I was in the kitchen when he called from his office upstairs. When I didn't answer right away, his voice echoed through the house, louder this time, sharper. "Lena, do you not hear me?" I froze, heart racing. By the time I got upstairs, his expression had softened again. "You have to listen when I call," he said, brushing a strand of hair from my face as if nothing had happened. After that, the rules started multiplying. Subtle things. Where to put his mail, how to fold his shirts, which perfume he preferred. None of it felt unreasonable on its own. But every time I forgot something, the tension returned. Not always words, sometimes just silence. Long, deliberate silence that wrapped around the room until I apologized for breathing wrong. Then came the night he checked my phone. I had left it on the coffee table while taking a shower. When I came back, he was sitting on the couch, scrolling. His face was calm, too calm. "Who's Caleb?" he asked without looking up. "Caleb's one of the nurses I used to work with," I said, confused. "Why?" He set the phone down slowly. "You still talk to men from your old job?" His tone wasn't angry. It was worse than that. It was cold, almost rehearsed. He just texted to say congratulations after the wedding. Grant smiled, but it didn't feel real. "I'm not upset," he said. I just need to know that I can trust you. From that night on, my phone stayed locked, but it didn't matter. He always found a way to look. Sometimes I'd catch him glancing at my screen when it lit up. Sometimes he'd ask, casually, who I was texting. I started deleting messages before he could ask. He told me it was love, that he only wanted to protect what was his. I wanted to believe him. I told myself that real relationships took work, that maybe I was being too sensitive. But the truth was there in every small correction, every lowered voice, every door that seemed to close behind me. I lived in a house filled with marble floors, chandeliers, and silence. From the outside, it looked like a dream, but inside, every step echoed like a warning. That was when I first understood what it meant to be trapped inside something beautiful. Love had turned into a cage, and the gold around it only made it harder to see the bars. The day of the appointment felt endless before it even began. The clinic was quiet, filled with the faint hum of machines and the sharp scent of disinfectant that never really leaves the air. I sat beside Grant in the waiting area, hands clasped tightly in my lap. He scrolled through his phone without a word, perfectly calm, like this was just another business meeting on his schedule. When the nurse called our names, I stood first. Grant followed, still typing. The hallway lights were too bright, washing the color out of everything. We sat across from the doctor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and the kind of practiced calm that comes from giving bad news too many times. She looked down at the folder in front of her before speaking. "Thank you both for coming in," she said softly. "We've reviewed the tests from last week." Grant leaned back in his chair, legs crossed, eyes fixed on the wall. I felt my pulse in my ears. The doctor's voice was steady, but my stomach turned with every pause. "There are some complications," she continued. "It appears conception might be difficult." The room seemed to shrink. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to stay still. "You mean for me?" I asked quietly. She hesitated. "The results indicate some factors on both sides, but—" Grant cut her off before she could finish. "So what you're saying is, she can't have children." His tone was clipped, impatient, as if he was summarizing a meeting he wanted to end. The doctor looked startled. "That's not exactly what I—" He stood, adjusting his cuffling. "Thank you, doctor. I think that's all we need to hear." I sat frozen, staring at the floor tiles. My name echoed in my head, but I couldn't bring myself to speak. The doctor gave me a sympathetic glance, but I couldn't meet her eyes. I stood slowly, following Grant out into the hallway. The moment we stepped outside, the air felt heavier. Grant didn't say a word as we walked to the car. When I finally tried to speak, my voice came out barely above a whisper. "We can try treatments, can't we? Or maybe." He unlocked the car without looking at me. "I don't want to talk about it right now." The drive home was silent. His hands gripped the steering wheel, his jaw tight. Every few seconds, he'd shake his head slightly, as if he were doing silent calculations in his mind. I watched his reflection in the window, not a single flicker of emotion, not even disappointment, just irritation like I'd broken something expensive. When we got home, he went straight to his office. I stood in the doorway, hoping he'd turn around, maybe say something kind, and instead he said, "I need time to think." That night, he slept in the guest room. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember when the sound of his breathing beside me had stopped being comforting. Over the next few days, the distance grew. He avoided me at breakfast, came home late, answered in short sentences. I caught him staring at me once across the living room, not with anger, but with something colder. Pity, maybe, or regret. The doctor's words kept replaying in my head, each repetition duller, heavier. The smell of antiseptic, the white walls, the tone of Grant's voice when he said she can't have children. That was the moment something in me went quiet. It wasn't the diagnosis that hurt the most. It was the way he looked everywhere except at me. The distance began like a shadow that grew too large to ignore. Grant's voice turned colder, his smile shorter. He stopped waiting for me at dinner, started answering calls in another room, always saying it was business. At first, I believed him. I wanted to. I told myself stress could make anyone distant, that success came with long nights and endless meetings. But slowly, the excuses stopped making sense. He started traveling more, sometimes for 2 days, sometimes for a week. He wouldn't tell me where, only that it was important. I'd ask when he'd be home, and he'd give the same answer every time. Soon. That word became a wall between us, something he could hide behind whenever he didn't want to explain. One evening, I found a hotel receipt tucked into his jacket pocket. The date was from a night he'd claimed to be in Austin for a client dinner. The address wasn't anywhere near there. I stood in the laundry room holding the paper, my hands shaking, staring at the bold black letters of a luxury hotel I'd never heard of. When I asked him about it, he didn't even blink. "It was a business expense," he said calmly, taking the receipt from my hand and tossing it in the trash. "Don't start imagining things." After that, I stopped asking. I didn't want to hear how easily he could lie to me. I wanted to believe there was still something left to fix. Then came the perfume, faint floral, expensive. It wasn't mine. I noticed it on his shirt collars, on his suit jacket, sometimes even in the car. He'd brush past me, smelling of someone else's evening. When I asked about it, he laughed. "You're being paranoid," he said, kissing my forehead before walking away. The scent lingered after he was gone. Nights grew longer. I'd wait for him by the window, lights dimmed, pretending not to care how late it got. When he came home, he'd head straight to the shower, humming softly, as if he didn't notice my red eyes. He stopped touching me. Even when he did, it felt like he was touching someone else. Once I tried to talk to him, really talk. I told him I missed us, that I wanted to fix what was breaking. He stared at me for a long moment before saying, "You're overthinking again, Lena. Everything's fine." His tone was flat, final. Then he turned back to his laptop like I wasn't even there. The house that once felt alive became a museum of silence. We sat at opposite ends of the dining table, eating meals we didn't taste. I started hearing whispers when he took phone calls late at night, a woman's voice, soft and familiar. He would lower his tone whenever I entered the room. I began to notice small changes. New shirts, different cologne, smiles that didn't belong to me. He'd come home smelling like another world, one that I wasn't part of. Every trace of him that lingered near me was proof of the life he lived somewhere else. Still, I tried. I cooked his favorite meals, left notes in his briefcase, told myself love meant patience. But patience became a way to hide from the truth. The marriage I was trying to save had already turned to ashes, and I was the only one sifting through what was left, pretending it could still burn again. It was a Friday night when the feeling finally became too heavy to ignore. Grant had told me he was leaving for a late meeting with investors in Dallas. His tone was casual, practiced. He'd been using that same excuse for weeks. But that evening, something in his eyes slipped. He avoided looking at me when he picked up his keys. His lie didn't sound like the others. It sounded careful. As soon as his car disappeared down the driveway, I grabbed my coat and purse. I didn't plan anything. I just drove. The air outside was cool, the sky dark enough to hide behind. I stayed a few cars behind him the entire time, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly that my fingers ached. He took the highway, then turned off onto a smaller road lined with pine trees. The farther we went, the more my heart pounded. After nearly an hour, his car slowed in front of a small cabin tucked deep in the woods. The porch light was on. It looked quiet, private, a place meant to be hidden. He parked beside another car, one I didn't recognize. My breath caught when I saw the front door open. A woman stepped out, holding something wrapped in a blanket. At first, I thought it was groceries, maybe laundry. But then I saw a small arm move. She rocked it gently, smiling at Grant as he walked up the steps. He kissed her. Not the rushed, guilty kiss of a man caught in something wrong, but a familiar, practiced one. Then he reached out and touched the baby's cheek. I stayed in my car, watching from the dark, frozen. The world around me went silent. The woman looked young, maybe in her mid-20s, her hair loose and messy. She laughed softly when Grant said something I couldn't hear. I couldn't breathe. I pressed a hand to my mouth, trying not to make a sound. The scene in front of me didn't feel real. My husband standing on a porch with another woman, holding a child that wasn't mine. He disappeared inside with them, and I sat there shaking. My chest burned, and my mind raced through every lie he had told. The business trips, the late meetings, the perfume. Everything fell into place like puzzle pieces I didn't want to see. After what felt like hours, the door opened again. Grant stepped out, holding the baby. He looked down at the tiny face with an expression I hadn't seen in months. Softness, pride, something close to love. Then he handed the child back to the woman and kissed her forehead before getting in his car. I stayed hidden until his taillights vanished down the road. Then I stepped out, my legs barely steady, and walked toward the cabin. The night was cold, the gravel crunching under my shoes. When I reached the porch, I could hear the faint sound of the baby crying inside. I didn't knock. I didn't need to. I turned back toward my car, the sound echoing in my ears. On the drive home, the road lights blurred through my tears. I gripped the steering wheel, forcing myself not to fall apart. The image of him holding that child replayed again and again, each time cutting deeper. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the last of my denial was gone. The truth had a heartbeat and a name I would never know. And as I sat in the silence of our perfect home, I finally understood that the life I'd been trying to hold together no longer existed. It had been replaced by a secret he chose to love in my place. He came home late that night, just past midnight. I was waiting in the living room, the only light coming from the lamp by the couch. The air was still heavy. His keys hit the table with a metallic clatter, and when he saw me sitting there, he didn't look surprised, just mildly annoyed, as if he had expected this moment. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, loosening his tie. His tone was flat, casual, like we were about to discuss the weather. "Where were you?" My voice trembled more than I wanted it to. He shrugged. walking toward the bar to pour himself a drink. Work dinner. I told you. No, I said quietly. You weren't at any dinner. He turned then, glass in hand, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. You've been checking up on me now? I followed you. The words came out before I could stop them. He froze for a second, his smirk fading just a little, then returned sharper than before. Well, he said slowly, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. I guess you found what you were looking for. The room seemed to tilt. You have a child, Grant, I whispered. A baby. With another woman. He didn't deny it. He didn't even look ashamed. Instead, he stepped closer, his eyes hard and distant. What did you expect me to do, Lena? He said, his voice low but cutting. You couldn't give me an heir. I had to find someone who could. Each word landed like a blow. My throat closed up, but I forced myself to meet his gaze. You think a baby fixes what you destroyed? He laughed quietly, setting the glass down. You always make everything dramatic. I needed a family. I gave you every chance, but you failed me. I stood, my legs shaking, fury burning beneath my skin. Failed you? I said, my voice breaking. You lied, cheated, and humiliated me. And now you're pretending it's my fault. He took a slow step closer until we were inches apart. You should be grateful I didn't leave you sooner, he said softly. You were nothing before me, Lee. Don't forget that. Something inside me cracked then, not from pain, but from the end of believing his words had power. I saw him clearly for the first time. The arrogance, the cruelty, the empty man behind the perfect smile. I used to feel sorry for you, I said, my voice steady now. Now I just feel sorry for anyone who believes you're worth loving. He scoffed, turning away. You'll come crawling back. You always do. But I didn't. That was the last night he saw the woman who made excuses for his cruelty. The woman who bent herself small to fit inside his version of love. I went upstairs, packed a small bag, and walked out of the house that had once felt like a dream. The air outside was cold, the stars dull behind the clouds. I didn't look back. Inside those walls, he would keep living the lie he'd built, but I was done breathing in his poison. That night didn't break me. It burned away everything weak that he had built around me. I didn't know what came next, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't his anymore. I was the reckoning he never saw coming. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and polish, the kind of place where voices carried longer than they should. I sat at the plaintiff's table, hands folded tightly, trying to keep my breathing steady. Across from me, Grant sat in his sharp gray suit, his expression carved in stone. He looked every bit the successful businessman he wanted the world to see, calm, confident, untouchable. His lawyer, a tall man with slicked-back hair, stood up and began to speak as if reading from a script. Your Honor, he said, my client's wife deceived him. She concealed a medical condition that made her unable to bear children. She used his affection, his resources, and his trust to secure a comfortable life built on love. Each word was a knife wrapped in courtesy. I didn't flinch. I'd rehearsed this moment in my mind too many times to let it break me now. Grant didn't look at me. He leaned back, one arm draped over his chair, a faint smirk touching his mouth. That same expression he used whenever he thought he'd already won. It was the look of a man who believed the world bent to his will, because it always had. The lawyer kept talking, his voice echoing through the high-ceilinged room. Mr. Halston has suffered deeply from this betrayal. Not only did his wife fail to disclose her infertility, but she also attempted to gain access to assets that she has no moral claim to. The word infertility rang through the room like an accusation. Some of the people sitting behind us murmured softly. I sat still, my palms slick against the table. My lawyer gave me a quick look, but I shook my head. I didn't need her to speak yet. Grant crossed one leg over the other, perfectly relaxed. To anyone else, he looked like a man wronged, grieving, dignified patient. Only I could see the faint gleam in his eyes, the satisfaction he got from watching me sit in silence. The judge shifted slightly in her seat. She was a stern woman with calm, unreadable eyes. On her desk, near the edge, lay the sealed envelope I had handed her before the proceedings began. It looked so small, so harmless, yet it carried the truth that would tear his illusion apart. When the lawyer finished, Grant stood. Your Honor, he said smoothly, I only ever wanted honesty. I gave her everything, but she couldn't even give me a child. What kind of marriage is that? A low murmur ran through the room again. I could feel the pity aimed at me, the judgment, the whispers that followed a woman labeled as less than whole. My heart pounded, but my face stayed calm. When my lawyer stood to respond, the judge raised a hand. Before you proceed, she said evenly, there is a piece of evidence that Mrs. Halston has submitted for review. Grant frowned, the first crack in his composure. The judge reached for the envelope, breaking the seal slowly. The sound of tearing paper filled the silence. I watched him as the judge unfolded the documents inside. He was trying to appear calm, but I saw the small twitch in his jaw, the flicker of unease he couldn't hide. The judge's eyes moved across the page. Her expression didn't change, but the silence that followed stretched longer, heavier. Finally, she looked up, not at me but directly at him. The smirk faded. His posture stiffened. For the first time since the hearing began, he looked uncertain. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The envelope sat open now, the truth spilling quietly between us like light creeping under a closed door. The room waited, the air thick with the weight of what was about to unfold. The judge's fingers slipped under the flap, pulling the seal apart with a sound that cut through the silence. Paper rustled softly as she unfolded the sheets, her eyes scanning each line with careful precision. The courtroom held its breath. Even the sound of the ceiling fan seemed to fade. Grant sat perfectly still at first, his posture deliberate, his expression polished. But when the judge's gaze shifted from the papers to him, something in his face changed, just slightly, enough to show a crack beneath the confidence. These documents, the judge began, her voice steady, contain medical and genetic evidence submitted by Mrs. Halston. Grant's lawyer straightened. Your Honor, may I ask? She raised a hand, stopping him. The first document is a medical report. It indicates a diagnosis made to Mr. Halston approximately 1 year ago, a condition resulting in irreversible infertility. Whispers spread across the room like ripples in water. Grant's head turned sharply toward me, eyes wide, disbelief flickering behind anger. I didn't move. That's not possible, he said quickly, forcing a laugh that came out too tight. That's not my report. The judge didn't blink. It is signed by your physician and bears your full legal name. The hospital confirmed its authenticity. The room went completely still. The same lawyer who had spent the morning painting me as broken now stood frozen beside him, his mouth half open, no words coming out. The judge lifted the second page. This next document is a DNA test result. It pertains to the minor child Mr. Halston presented publicly as his biological offspring. Grant's face drained of color. His lawyer stammered something about relevance, but the judge continued. The test confirms that Mr. Halston is not the biological father of that child. The sound that followed wasn't noise, it was the absence of it. Every person in that courtroom seemed to stop breathing. Papers fluttered in someone's hands, then dropped. A chair creaked in the back. Grant rose from his seat abruptly. This is absurd, he snapped. Those tests are lies fabricated. The judge's voice cut through his panic. Sit down, Mr. Halston. He didn't. His composure broke completely now. His face, once calm and arrogant, twisted with something raw and ugly. You think she didn't set this up? She's vindictive. She's trying to destroy me. I stayed quiet. My hands rested on the table, still as stone. For months, I had listened to him twist the truth, paint himself as the victim. But now, the lies that built his world were unraveling right in front of everyone he wanted to impress. The judge glanced at me once, briefly, before turning back to him. The evidence speaks for itself, Mr. Halston. Your claims against your wife are dismissed. Any attempt to defame or financially penalize her will be considered further misconduct. His lawyer sank back into his chair, defeated. Grant stood there, shaking his head, as if disbelief could change the facts. The people who had come to watch him were now watching him fall apart. He looked at me finally, not with anger, but with something close to fear. His voice dropped low. You did this to me. I met his stare and said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. The sound echoed through the room, sealing the truth he could no longer bury. His empire, his pride, his illusion of control, all of it fractured in that single moment. When I stood to leave, no one stopped me. I walked past him without looking back, the weight of years lifting from my shoulders. Behind me, I could still hear the faint murmur of voices and the rustle of papers, but it no longer mattered. The truth had spoken, and for the first time in a long time, I was free. Do you think I did the right thing by exposing him and walking away, or should I have stayed and tried to fix it? I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like mine.